Okay. What we're going to be doing here is casting a 3-bell peal for Our Lady of Light Church in Fort Myers, Florida. The largest bell will weigh about 1,000 pounds, and they'll be mounted in the tower in a stationary configuration. What the guys are doing right now is, what they've got attached to the crane right now is the ladle, what we call the ladle, and that's how they're going to be transferring the molten metal from the furnace to the molds. If you look just above the ladle, in between the hook and the actual bell of the ladle, you'll see a digital readout. That's actually a scale. It's important when we start pouring the metal into the molds that we don't stop. So we need to know how much metal is in the ladle all the time so that we know once we start the pour, we can actually finish the pour and fill the mold completely. So there's the bronze flowing out. Right now it's probably about somewhere between 2,100 and 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit. You'll see Ralph actually pouring some, their actual beads of phosphorus bronze into the metal. What that does, by adding phosphorus to the molten metal, it makes the metal more fluid-like and it flows into the mold better. It also it acts as a flux, and it makes, if there is any contaminants or anything at all inside the metal, it'll make the stuff float on top of the molten metal so that it can be skimmed off. One good thing is because the metal is so dense, the dirt or any contaminants that get in the metal will always float, and they're easy to scoop off. So if you watch the digital readout, you can see it climbing pretty quick. We're above 900 pounds now. You can kind of see as the furnace keeps tilting, you can kind of look down inside the furnace. Basically what the furnace is it's a steel barrel that's lined with with bricks in mortar, and then down inside that we set a crucible. And the crucible is the actual pot where the metal melts. So they've loaded up about 1,500 pounds, 1,550 pounds into the ladle. Looks like they're going to pour the smallest bell of the peal first. This bell, the finished weight of this bell will be about 250 pounds or so. What Ralph's going to do now is take the temperature of the metal. So what we do is we superheat the metal up past the temperature we want to pour at. During the transfer of metal, we usually lose a couple of hundred degrees of temperature. So we want to pour the bells. These bells we're going to pour somewhere about 1,850 degrees, something like that. So there's a fine line. We want the metal to be hot enough to be fluid and flow into the mold quickly, but we don't want it so hot that we actually burn the mold up before the metal has time to solidify. So there's kind of a happy medium there, and we're constantly adjusting the pouring temperature depending on the size of the bell. What Ralph's doing right now is any contaminants that are floating on top of the metal, he's going to kind of scoop up and get rid of. And then if there's anything left in there, basically he'll just rake it to the back of the ladle. Because the metal, or because the dirt always floats, it'll always go to the top. so we can pour the good bronze from the bottom of the ladle. So when we start pouring, he'll start pouring kind of easy and slow. And the reason for that is what we want to do is build up a little, we'll call it a little puddle inside the pour basin. If you just start pouring the metal real fast, it wants to kind of bounce out of the mold. So we'll start pouring slow, and then once there's a little puddle on the bottom of the pour basin, then he'll pick up the pour rate and pour it quickly down into the mold. You want to keep the pour basin full and the metal flowing as quickly as possible into the mold. So the metals, it looked like just a little bit hot, a little hotter than he wants to pour it. So we'll just kind of hang out for a minute and let the metal cool off. It cools off very quickly, so it won't take long. All right, looks like we're ready now. So he'll get suited back up. Now when he starts pouring, I said he'll start slow and then he'll increase the rate of speed. Once the mold starts filling, you're going to see a bunch of smoke start coming out of the hole in the back of the mold. Basically, that hole is it's kind of a flow off. What that does is it gets rid of any atmosphere or anything that's inside the mold that we don't want in there. So as the chemicals in the sand start to burn off, they cause gases. And those gases vent in the form of smoke out the back of the mold. So as Ralph continues to pour, you'll see more and more smoke coming out of there, and then eventually you'll see a little bit of metal start coming out of there, and usually there's a little bit of fire. There you go. You can see it, how it filled up and caught fire a little bit. So that mold's full. And we'll move on to the second bell. This bell's finished weight will be about, they're going to move to the large bell. It looks like they're going to go back for just a little bit more metal. As I said earlier, we don't want to start the pour unless we're absolutely sure that we have enough metal in the ladle. So that bell's finished weight will be about 1,000 pounds, but with the gates and the risers and the pour basin and all that, that eats up a lot of metal. So he'll probably dump another 200 or 300 pounds of metal in there just to make absolutely sure that we don't run out of metal during the pour. And then they'll go back to the mold and do the same process we did with the smaller bell. So you can watch the back of the mold again. You'll see probably even more smoke and fire coming out of this one as more material burns off. Ralph will make sure that any contaminants are pushed towards the back and then start the pour. So some of the things we look for as we're pouring, you got to keep your eye on the mold. You know, obviously, if we start seeing metal start running out of the mold somewhere, you want to try to get that stopped. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad casting. It just means you've got a leak in the mold, which sometimes happens. So he's going to keep pouring. You see the smoke. And the idea is to feed the pour basin as fast as what the mold is fed. So you want the pour basin to remain full, and the mold will just take what it wants until it's full. So he's probably getting pretty close now to being full. Yeah, there it is. I can see the fire coming out the back, so 200 pounds extra metal. Pretty good. Okay, they'll go back to the furnace now. Probably pour the rest of the metal in there. And then go back. And I think what they're going to do, if you guys look to the right-hand side of the furnace, there's some smaller molds sitting on that table back there. Those are some smaller bells and some decorative brackets that we're also casting today for a customer. And I think what they're going to do is try to pour those first. They'll pour those by hand with a lot smaller ladle. He'll add the phosphorus again, and then shut the furnace down. So as he dumps it, you can kind of look at the top of the furnace, and you can see that crucible in there. The crucible's made out of silicon carbide. It's incredibly hard, but it's brittle, so you got to be careful when you're loading the furnace or trying to take metal out of the furnace that you don't hit the crucible, because it's easily broken. So they'll hook the ladle back up. And they're going to go over and do these small molds. What we do on some of our smaller bells, some of the very small bells, we can cast more than one bell in a mold. So you'll see Ralph probably dump a number of scoops of metal into each of these molds. All right, now they're going to pour that larger mold in the back. little splashing going there, it looks like. All right, they got the small molds poured. Now they're going to go back and do the last bell of the peel for Our Lady of Light. This bell, the finished weight of this bell will be right around 500 pounds. Take the temperature one last time to make sure that it's where we want it. The longer the metal stays in the molten state, it basically corrodes from the top, so you get what's called dross on top of the metal. And it's basically where the atmosphere meets the molten metal, it forms a crust. And so that's what he's scooping off. We'll start the pour. And again, we're going to be watching that back flow off. We want to eventually see some smoke start coming out of there, and eventually some fire, and then we should see the metal kind of shoot up out of there. And I see the smoke. Should see the fire real soon. There it is. There's the metal. So that's the third and final bell for the 3-bell peel, Our Lady of Light. We've got about 700 pounds of metal left in the ladle. They've got one more bell here they're going to pour. So we always melt more metal than what we need. Again, we don't want to run out of metal, so they'll pour. So this one's basically full. It looks like they got about 350 pounds of metal left. What they'll do, if you look in the very back, you see it looks like another mold, but it's got no top on it. Basically, all we do is prepare an extra mold to dump the molten metal into. You want to get rid of it out of the crucible, because when metal solidifies, it'll stick to the ladle. So we want to get it out of the ladle. So what they'll do is just empty the ladle right into this mold. We'd like to thank Our Lady of Light Church, Fort Myers, Florida, for trusting Verdin with their new bells. These bells will sit in the mold for probably about a week, and then next week we'll start breaking the bells out, and then it's the arduous task of removing the extra metal and grinding and polishing, and then we build the bell equipment, and then we'll be on site just before Christmas to install the bells, so they will have bells for Christmas. And then we also want to thank the Honor Bell Foundation for being with us today from Colorado, who came in to see some bells cast. And we'll be casting a memorial bell for them next May.